it's life support equipment. Anyone who brings me their stuff, I'm taking photos of it before, I'm taking photos of it after I clean it, and I'm taking photos of everything after I test it to show you, hey, here's everything I did.
Off Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. Always breathe, never hold your breath. The most important rule in scuba diving. The equipment allowing us to follow this rule is often neglected when it comes to proper care and maintenance. Chatting with Sam Johnson, a full-time repair tech on the island of Hawaii, I get a chance to hear his perspective and insight when it comes to this side of the industry. Common problems, unsafe practices, nuances of servicing different brands, a detailed approach to servicing, and much more. Please enjoy. Sam, welcome to the podcast today, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. I had a nice day at work. I did a bunch of VIPs, listened to some musics. Now I'm here just hanging out at night.
Nice. And you are located in Hawaii.
Yeah, I'm in Kailua Kona, Hawaii. Actually, what made me want to reach out to you was I listened to your podcast and I heard, I believe his name's Max. He works at a dive shop that I used to work at. And I was like, oh man, that's cool. I like this podcast. So I was like, let me reach out to Nick and see if I can't give some advice myself.
I want to say, Max, there might be one other person, and I feel horrible if I can't remember, but I might have had somebody else from Hawaii. Oh, no. Actually, yes. Very early on, I don't know if you know who. I've had two more people from Hawaii. One is Richard Pyle, who's like one of my first guests, and then Brian Green. I can't remember. They're over there by a museum. I can't remember exactly where in Hawaii, but they're...
That's got to be on Oahu then.
Okay, yeah. They're fish identification. They self-proclaimed fish nerds is what they say. And
cool.
Yeah, they've done some very, very cool stuff. But welcome to the podcast. My first question I always like to ask is, tell me how and why you became a diver. Tell me about that first breath, that first moment. Was it, I absolutely hate this? Was it, this is absolutely amazing? Was it, this is all right? Tell me all about it.
So I got into it because my dad did it. And I think I was probably maybe 8, 9, or 10 when he started doing it. And, you hear about your dad going and breathing underwater and seeing fish. And he was going to, tropical destinations to do it. And I was like, that sounds so cool. That's the coolest thing I could ever imagine. So I begged my parents when I was like 10. I was like, please let me do this. And they were like, no, not until you're 12. Yeah, they made me wait. So 2 years later, I got my open water when I was 12. I did my first 2 dives in Lake Winnipesaukee, New Hampshire. And then I did my last 2 dives in this place called Nubble Light off the coast of Maine in the Atlantic Ocean. That was rough, but I vaguely remember I loved it from the second I got into it. I just loved the weightlessness, being underwater, the buoyancy, the sense of adventure is what's always kept me diving. And, now what I do more 7 days a week is fixing stuff, but what kept me diving and still keeps me diving is that feeling of seeing something that other people don't get to see. And it almost feels like, it's cool in its own right, but it feels like you work towards something so that you can go a little farther and see a little more. And that's been a lot of my big dives has things that's like, hey, you need to train for this and get ready for that. But I remember sitting in the classroom when I was 12 and I looked at that chart that I'm sure anyone who's a dive professional has seen. That's open water diver here and the next step's advanced. And then it goes all the way up the ladder and it expands out. And I remember looking at it and being like, dive instructor. That's it.
Oh, it's top tier. Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to do that. And so got certified when I was 12. And then, from 12 to probably about 19 or 20, it was just vacation dives. And I went to school for cinema arts and science, which is a fancy way to say I was a film student. And I was sitting in class one day with some other film students and we were just talking story and they go, I was, I love to scuba dive. They're like, hey, you can do underwater photography and videography. And a light bulb went off. And I was like, that's it. Because I still do love doing photo and film. And so I did some research and I found an opportunity to come out actually here where I am now and do an internship filming and photographing the manta rays, which I know we had Max on and he talks about doing the manta ray night dive here. And so I came out here, I worked for them for a month. And actually when I was here doing that, I said, I don't know if I could live in Hawaii. It's a little quiet. I was living in Chicago at the time. And as soon as I got back from Hawaii filming, I was like, that's it. That's what I'm gonna do. I want to be there. And they offered to like change my flights and pay for them and say, hey, stay with us for another month. We loved having you. And I was, no, I want to go home. I want to go work and hang out with my friends before I start school, so I have some money. And the second I got home, I called them. I was like, hey, will you fly me back? They wouldn't fly me back. They were like, we can't pay it both ways. So anyways, as soon as I got done with school that year, I was like all about diving, and I found an internship in the Keys for 6 months. I'm sure you may or may not have. Actually, I don't even know, where are you located in the world?
I am in Malaysia, but originally from the States. And actually, just
Cool.
real quick, I wanted to ask you a quick question. So you said you got certified in Lake Winnipesaukee. Are you originally from New Hampshire?
Yeah. You know
oh,
it?
no shit. Oh, dude, I grew up there.
No way. Where'd you grow up?
No shit, dude. I grew up in Londonderry, like
Oh
right next to
yeah,
Manchester.
Londonderry. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Wait. How old are you?
Me, shit, dude, old, 40, 41. I'll be
Okay.
42 next
So
year.
you were 10 years ahead of me, but that's funny, man. We probably, if we tried hard enough, we could probably find at least one or two people who were like, oh yeah, I know
Oh,
them.
so here's a funny story. My friend that I grew up with, he actually had a house on Cow Island in Lake Winnipesaukee. I think it's called Cow Island on Lake Winnipesaukee. And crazy, crazy story. But we were up there. Shit, this was probably like 2000 or 2000. I can't remember. Probably like, it was either like 99 or 2000. And crazy, crazy story. But we were up there just, being dumb kids. And his lake house, we basically, I don't want to say burnt it to the ground, but it was this huge fire on Cow Island. I'm sure if anybody in that area remembers that time, because you know how Winnipesaukee, I think it covers like 3 or 4, however many different counties.
Yeah.
So like all these different county fire boats came and like were putting the fire out, and we're just like dumb, like 17, 18 at the time. Like, holy shit, what did we just do? And yeah. So where in New Hampshire are you from?
So obviously pretty well, New London.
Yeah. Okay. So you're
Yeah.
okay. No shit, dude. Damn.
Yeah,
That's a
so
fucking
I was
small
in a
world.
little town next to it called Wilmette, but yeah, New London's right next door, and my parents were there. I mean, I don't know. No, I think my dad's side of the family's been there for probably 100 years more.
Oh, no shit, dude.
Yeah.
How is the dive? Do you remember the diving in Winnipesaukee? Because I've wanted to go
I
back.
do.
I literally have wanted to go back. There's a place in Vermont that I heard is super nice, Lake Champlain. I don't know if you ever
Yeah.
heard or went there.
Mhm.
But supposedly there's really nice old wrecks there, fresh water. I don't know the visibility. I don't know anything about it. I just heard that there's some diving, and I was like, man, one of these days I got to take a trip back to the Northeast and do some diving. Still have a lot of friends up there, but I haven't been. Last time I was there, I think was like 2008. 2008 maybe. It's been a long time.
I'm not the person to give you an honest review of the diving in New Hampshire in the lakes. I do have friends that own a dive shop there. Ooh, I don't want to say the wrong name. There's like the one I got certified with was Aquanauts, and then their shop is their names are Brian and Terry. They're the most fun people. God, it's gonna kill me if I don't remember their name, but I'll think about it. But they say the diving off the coast there, down, was it Nashua or not Nashua? What's the
Hampton
coastline?
Beach.
Hampton Beach. Yeah, thank you. Hampton Beach. They say that diving is actually a lot of fun, and the seal diving is cool. So like, they're like, oh, come back. We'll get you in a dry suit. We'll get you out. It'll be awesome. Come do it. I've been spoiled here for 8 years diving in 80-degree water. So like, it's a real hard
Dude, yeah.
sell if there's not a wreck there. But I can tell you what I remember from Lake Winnipesaukee. I remember getting in. I remember seeing I think some freshwater fish, maybe about the size of a football, that swam up to us, looked at us, and swam away. And I remember rocks. And I remember doing my navigation with my compass, and I was partnered up with some adult, and we both didn't really know how to use a compass, and went off in one direction. I remember looking at my instructor and had looked up above the water and looked at her and got back. She's like, "Did you do that without looking at it?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, totally." And yeah, now I can teach using a compass. So here we go. We're getting better.
That's fucking hilarious.
Nubble
dude.
Light though, if you can deal with the cold, Nubble Light was pretty cool. There was it was fun seeing lobsters. We found a blue lobster while we were down there, but numbing cold. I'm on the same level as you though. I do want to go before I really get up there in the 50s. I'm only 31 now, but before I get 50 or 60, I would love to go do the Northeast Rex. Andrew Dory is a dream one before it hopefully diminishes too much. unfortunately, yeah, there's some other things on my list, and most of them are warm water and caves now.
Oh, I don't blame you, man. So I actually made it a point. Well, I said to myself, because I caught in some shit on the podcast, will not hide the fact I am a warm water diver. Like, I hate being cold. I lived in the mountains for a while, grew up in New Hampshire, moved to Colorado, did the snowboard ski bum thing for a while, and I hate being cold. Like, I absolutely hate it. But I was like, man, there's a lot of nice destinations that would be amazing to go diving in, but very cold water. And I was like, I just need to get like a few dives out of the way and just check it out. But yeah, I hear you, man. I'm warm water and caves. And actually, I'm kind of curious to hear more about that. But so you made it back out to Hawaii, and you just basically was like, this is it. I'm staying here and working, or how did that work out?
I did the 6 months in the Keys at Rainbow Reef.
Oh, yes.
So I did there, and that's where I got my instructors. And as soon as I finished my instructors, I called the people who were my internship in Hawaii. And I was like, hey, I'm an instructor now. I can not only come and film for you, but if you have people who are doing your internship, I can teach them diving, because that was part of it. And so when I called them to do that, they were like, yeah, sure. If you're getting out here, we'll give you a job. So I left the Keys in 2016. And then I moved out here, and I've been here for the last, 8 years?
Okay. Did you start doing cave diving in the Keys? Or not the Keys, but Florida. Florida, I should say. Sorry, not the Keys, Florida.
I didn't. No. I got into technical diving there, and that's where I started learning about decompression and all that. And then when I got out here, I got more into technical diving because if you've never been to the Big Island, it's awesome. I wish they had more wrecks, but you get out basically a couple hundred feet offshore, and you're in a couple hundred feet of water. And yeah, they've got beautiful deep reefs in certain places, so it's definitely worth doing some tech diving. But if you're looking for like wrecks and caves, the only real wrecks we have are in Oahu. I'm kind of a wreck snob, man. I went to Bikini. It's hard for me to talk about wrecks. People are like, oh, it's an awesome wreck, and I'll get down there. It's like 100 feet long, and there's like one swim through, and the rest of it's just like holds for cargo, and I'm like, yeah, that's cool. It's fun. Man, after you dive the Saratoga, oh man, it's hard to do anything else.
Oh, so that's so funny. So I was just in Indonesia, and they have a wreck there. It's called Kubu Wreck, and I like it. It's so funny. I like it. It's not a big wreck, kind of like you're saying. And there was another guy there who basically, I can't remember if it was Bikini or if it was somewhere else. He went somewhere like a real just prominent wreck destination. And the reason why I wanted to go to Kubu Wreck is I think it's a great place for pictures. So there was a guy with the camera there, and I tried to set something up with my girlfriend. I was like, hey, can we go over here and do some pictures? It'd be awesome to have some pictures of me and her, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, Kubu Wreck would be awesome. And the guy was like, I'm not going to Kubu Wreck. That's not a real wreck. And I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? You know what I mean? I'm like, dude, this is a nice wreck. Like, what are you talking about? So I kind of give him a little bit of shit for it, but he's super, super nice guy. But he's definitely been to some amazing wrecks, and I could see that for sure. Like if you go to some world-class destinations, it's hard to be like, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Luckily for me, like, it sounds like you're into cave diving as well. I just am kind of getting my foot in the cave world. I did my full cave cert last year, March. I guess this year, March. And then here on the Big Island, there's a couple lava tubes that are certifiable caves. And when I went in them, it was a couple weekends ago, I went in one, and you get in, and it's a cave, but it's like a lava tube is very much just, it's a tube. There's no stalactites. There's no you're not going to find a small little offshoot hole. And so, but I was psyched. I'm like, yeah, I'm in a cave again.
Yeah.
And we're laying in line, and we're like, this is some place that people don't go. And yeah, that was pretty fun. So
where'd you get certified?
Down in Tulum.
No shit.
A buddy of mine, March 2023. Yeah.
So last year or this year?
Wait, oh man, they run together. I think it was this year. I'm pretty sure it was 2024. I'd have to look at my calendar exact to know, but it was this year, because I've been thinking about going back, and I was like, I want to go back at least within the year, like a 1 year period. So yeah, I'm planning on going again early next year.
What shop did you go with?
I didn't. My buddy's been down there about 20 years. He gets all of his tank fills and is close with the guys at ProTech.
Oh, okay.
So actually I met Kim when I was down there and everything briefly, and saw their shop, which so from a techie, fixing stuff side, I walked into their tank room, and I was looking around. I was like, man, that's a nice fill station. And then like I saw their repair room, and I was like, that's real pristine. That's real nice looking. Everything's clean and like where it should be. I was like, oh, they got a good setup here. They know what they're doing.
No shit, dude. That's so funny. It's like, so we basically kind of just missed each other because I was down. Well, I was more in Porto Aventuras, but I got my full cave certification. I completed it in May. I got down there in May, spent the whole month of May down there, and then went down to Tulum to get certified on a rebreather with Third Dimension. And I got some interviews with some ProTech guys, but I didn't end up going to the shop. I was planning on it, but just it didn't work out. But no, that's super funny, man.
Which rebreather?
I did the Fathom Gemini.
Fuck yeah. All right, man. So, all right, we're going to get lost for a second here because I need to know about it. Because I've been looking at it. I was just at DEMA and I was looking at the Sidewinder 2, and I've been looking at the Sidewinder. And so from the outside looking in, not having used either of them, I'm literally looking at my Optima right now. Out from the outside looking in, the Sidewinder and the Gemini basically looks like the Sidewinder if you get all the upgrades that everyone's like, hey, when you buy the Sidewinder, you're going to get this and this and this and this. That's kind of what it seems like the Gemini did. Is that?
Yes, I would agree.
Okay.
I would agree. Yeah. But I don't know the release. Well, I think that they're talking about springtime 25 of the release of the Sidewinder 2. So
Yeah.
I would actually love to get some eyes on that because, to be honest, I don't even know if I've actually gotten eyes on a Sidewinder. I know I've seen him in the water, but actually like gone up and actually had a chance to look at it. So it's my first rebreather. I'll say that my first rebreather. I did a couple tri dives on some other units, a back mount unit, another side mount unit, a chest mount unit. And I love the Gemini, right? Like I absolutely love it, especially because I try to dive side mount as much as possible. Obviously it doesn't happen as often as I would like, right tool for the job. Sure. But no, I absolutely love it. And that's kind of what I heard too, was that you get the Sidewinder, and that's a phenomenal machine that has pushed boundaries and limits. Like, I don't want to say anything bad about it because I don't know it enough to say anything bad about it. But I've heard the same thing, and that's why I opted for the Gemini. I know the biggest thing that a lot of people told me is with the Sidewinder, I think there's only one way to monitor your PO2, which was
Right.
which was a huge downside for a lot of people. Some people are willing to take the risk. It's completely obviously up to the diver. But as far as the Fathom Gemini, I've had Charlie on the podcast a few times, who is one of the owners or the owner of Fathom, and I just was kind of sold on it. But what did you think of the Sidewinder 2? I haven't had a chance to get eyes on it. Like, as far as it's obviously a little bit more complicated. They've done a few more things, but what did you think of it?
So right away, like when I went up to him and started talking about it, little side note, I actually listened to Patrick Widman on your podcast, and I was at work fixing regs or something, and I'm listening to that podcast and listening to him talk the whole time. I was like, this dude is motivational as all
Oh
shit.
my God, dude, yes.
And so I actually went up to the KISS booth when I was there, and he's standing right next to the Sidewinder 2, and I was like, hey man, I just want to say hi real quick and tell you I listened to that podcast you were on, Nick Hogel, and I was like, man, you are one of the most motivational humans I know, and like listening to you talk made me just want to go do everything I could in diving at that exact moment. But what I thought about it when I was talked to one of the engineers, I feel bad, I can't remember his name, and he kind of gave me a rundown of everything that was different. And at the end of the day, like, it's a different rebreather. I mean, the setup is the same, but it is like a whole new unit. It looks like they did a really great job of revamping all the things people didn't like, and they've even added some extra features that probably are even a little redundant. One of the things they talked about was that they have a couple different OPV valves. One's on the counterlungs themselves, and then there's one on the downstream side of your loop, like on the canister. And they were like, yeah, I think this one was optional, and like because you have one here, and it's so much so that I guess with any new unit, the problem is that people need to start diving it.
Yeah.
You need to get a year or two out there of, hey, this is what actually happens, because like with any piece of equipment in any industry, you can test it and test it and test it, but then you need one person to go and do that one really weird thing and be like, hey man, you won't believe what happened to me today.
Yeah.
And so it looks really cool. I don't have any experience diving the Sidewinder 1, so I can't talk much about it, but I will say they did a great job of all of the little negatives I heard here and there. It sounds like a phenomenal unit. Sorry, I didn't really give you specifics on it, but
No. I mean, that's totally fine. And I completely agree because I did my Gemini training in Tulum I can't remember, obviously did the minimum mandatory hours to pass the course, plus more. I did a few fun dives afterwards. And then this past, basically in November, I went out to Indonesia with the sole purpose of like, okay, I'm spending time on the rebreather. I'm putting a lot of time on the rebreather. I need to be able to get back into it. And, obviously in the beginning, it's different. Like I had too much of a gap in between when I was able to dive it last to when I was able to get back on the unit, and diving it for basically like 30 days straight, with days off here and there. I was finding things that I'm like, okay, this is something that I'll have to look out for in the future. This is something, like kind of just taking the unit and breaking it down, getting it set up for the next day. Like, okay, to the point where I even came back and I was like, hey, because I'm based in Malaysia, so obviously it's kind of hard to get stuff out here. I emailed Fathom and I was like, hey, could I get a few of these parts? Because I could just maybe see like over time something happening, and then I don't want to be stuck somewhere without it. But if I have the piece already, I'll be able to swap it out. And that's actually another really nice thing that I really like about the unit is when you look at it, it's super simple. So, like, if you have any kind of mechanical sense, it's like, oh, I could just take that and pop a new one on. Or other than, there's no major electronics other than the computer. Yep. So it's super, super simple to where if something happens, I feel that I'll be able to, like, get it together or fix something, and I won't have to send it all the way back to Florida and have it, like some other machines, like some of them I looked at were really nice. But I'm like, dude, if that fucks up, I'm going to have to send it back to Florida. I live in Malaysia, so that's, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks from the time I get, So I was like, okay, let's get something simple. And that's why I'm really, really happy with my purchase. So as far as the Gemini, I would highly recommend it, depending on the type of diving you're doing. But I can see myself getting into a back mount unit at some point. And you said you're on the Optima?
So I have the 2018 version of the Optima, the back mounted unit. I really like it. I like it for what it is, but I want to get into a side mounted unit because, and like if somebody's listening to this right now who is like a fanboy of Dive Right, which I think they make great stuff, but if like a person who works there listening to this, they're going to scream like chest mounted, chest mounted, chest mounted. But I want to get something lower profile for cave diving. The things I love about my unit, I can specifically speak to because I dived a lot. This thing is a workhorse. Like it doesn't break. Like if you do your pre-dive checks, and even if like if it starts flooding underwater, it's going to keep working. I love that which some people really don't like, is I love that it can use either the Sorb that you pack, or you can use the Extend-Air cartridges, because there are those days where, someone will hit me up when I'm getting off work at 5. They're like, hey, you want to go out tomorrow morning? The boat's going to leave at 5. Like my buddy has a rebreather. He's like, he got a boat. He's like, hey, you want to go dive? And I'm like, yeah, I want to go dive. I got to do meal prep, and my girlfriend wants me to do this, and I don't want to spend the, 10, 20 minutes it takes to pack Sorb and do all my checks. So like I can just throw that in there and I'm good to go. I love that 95% of it is all, like you said, easy to service by myself. The only thing I've never given my hand at is the solenoid. So that's the other thing, is I'm looking at a unit that's a needle valve, ideally, because I just don't want to have to mess with the solenoid anymore. What I don't like is that, you're limited to certain depths with a needle valve out of the box. I know with a constant flow orifice you are.
Yeah. Well, what's nice about the needle valve is it's adjustable. So you can, like the Gemini has a needle valve. So what's nice about it is I can adjust it as I go. So
okay. That's
what another nice, I don't want to say selling point, but another nice thing that was something different. But, I'll say it again. I don't have any experience with anything else. So I can't really give too much advice or even speak to it, just because of the fact that it's like, okay, I know about it in theory, but I haven't been able to go diving with it. So I know the limitations or what things are designed to do. But as far as personal experience, I did the tri dives, but I don't really count those because, you're kind of just like everything's set up for you. Everything's not set up for you. You're kind of just getting a very mock core, like, hey, this is how things go. Boom, let's get in the water. And they were good, solid tri dives, like 30, 40, I think one dive was like 50 minutes. They were solid. But as far as like getting to know a unit, I definitely would say that, yeah, my only experience is with the Gemini. So
yeah, to know a unit, you need to have it. You need to take it apart, put it together like 100 times. You need to dive it. You need to see something go wrong with it.
Oh, exactly.
That's when you're like, oh, okay, I see the things I like. I see the things I don't like. Let me find my next $10,000 and go get a different one. Like
No,
it's
for real
bad.
though. Oh, that's so funny. And it's funny that you say that about the chest mount. So I was diving with a lot of different other rebreather divers out there, which was also really nice to kind of get some experience just being spending some time around some other units. And the Choptima, the chest mount, man, that's, I feel like that's becoming like, I used to say the Sidewinder was like the internet sweetheart. I feel like the Choptima is like the new kid on the block. Like everybody's diving that, everybody loves it. And I was diving with a bunch of Choptima divers, a few Revo divers, a couple Inspo divers, and yeah, I'm a Dive Right fanboy. I like their products. I think that they make great stuff. I haven't tried their rebreathers or anything like that, but I definitely, the products that I have had, I definitely like. So I could see them making a really nice unit. And apparently the people that I was speaking to are just huge fans of it. So, but
Yeah.
I didn't want to go the chest mount route. I did try the Choptima. That was one of the try dives, but I was like, eh.
I'll tell you the reason that people have talked, like, I'm like, oh, I want to go get the Gemini. I've told people that, and they're like, well, why don't you get some of the money from selling your Optima? And I was like, because I have this like pipe dream of I would one day love to do longer expedition rebreather diving, and I think that, like you said earlier, there's always the right tool for a job, and you can get a conversion kit from the back mounted Optima to the Choptima for, I think it's like 2,500.
Oh, no shit.
And
Okay.
yeah, so it's not bad because most of the components are there. It's just a couple of things change, and I could see it being a real amazing unit for doing a redundant rebreather setup, right? So Raka, like if you're doing like especially confined area, do a side mount like a Gemini or a Sidewinder 2 or whatever, and then put the Choptima on the front, and everything's nice and compact in there. They run mostly off small bottles. Other than that, it's going to be your side mount bottles that you're going to have anyways. I think it could be a really good system. So that's kind of one of the reasons I hold on to it. Also, it's my rebreather that I have, and I love diving it, so I'm
Oh
gonna
yeah,
keep it.
and that's a funny thing because I always joke around and I don't want to call myself a hoarder, but like as soon as I own a piece of equipment, I'm just like I don't want to sell it, dude. I had a pair of fins that I literally kept for like 5 years. I only used them once, and they sat in a box, and I'm like, I need to sell those, but one day I might need them for some reason, and then I just ended up giving them away before I moved out of Texas because I was like, dude, I can't. It's just gonna sit in a box. I might as well give them to a buddy who might use them. But speaking of servicing and fixing things on your own, tell me about your current work and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'm lucky in the fact that I get to do it full time. I spend 5 days a week either fixing BCDs, regs. I do a little bit of, battery changes on computers. I work with compressors. I work with tanks. And that's really the part that I have found of the industry that I love. I worked for a while doing the boats, and I got burned out on the revolving door of the same thing, every day, especially with the Manta dive. It gets tough. So I took a course on repairing atomic regulators back when I first moved here because it was the reg I owned, and I was like, I want to work on it. I've always been the type of person that likes to tinker. And so when I got into it, I did mine, and then I did some of my friends, and one day I got a chance to do some of the shops that I worked at because they had atomic rentals, and I started going through them, and I found I had a knack for fixing it and problem solving. And so basically through the years, I started being like, hey, what other certs can I get so that I can, offer more to the community around us? And as I went through and got more and more certs, I got more interested in it, and I started doing some research on my own. And now I'm lucky enough that I get to do it full time. And the reason I say that is because I think this is a part of the industry that gets neglected in that you don't find often somebody that is a full-time technician. You find somebody who is teaching and they're working the front of the shop and they're fixing stuff in the back, on the days that it's slow or when something needs to get fixed. And I think the thing that can really change there is with any industry, you get better at something by doing reps, right? Your first DSD, you're an instructor?
Yes, yeah. I haven't
Yeah.
actively taught in a while, but yes, I used to be more active, but yeah.
Your first DSD or your first open water class, I don't know about you, but it was a nightmare, man. It went horribly. And if that person's still diving, I'm sorry to you. I hope somebody out there took you under their wing and was like, hey, let me show you how to dive. But the more you do it and the more reps you get practice, you see the problems and you remember those problems. And next time they come up, you can react better and give better advice. And so because I probably I think I do about 400 to 600 regs a year, I see a lot of weird problems. As I get, see more and more, I've learned better ways to fix things, faster ways, and I've tried to provide a service for people in my community that's something that I don't see very often. So I really love what I do.
I actually really commend that because I completely agree. So there was, I think at the first shop that I started taking courses from, I think they had a guy, but he would just come in on the weekends and they would only service certain types of regs, basically the regs that they sold. Anything that they didn't sell, they would, there was a guy, I even want to say he was from the Chicago area. I can't remember his name or the business. The second shop that I worked at, basically he did a lot of different regs. And so, we would package them up and then ship them out. Since I left, I know that the owner has gotten more people certified and they've kind of opened up the service side of it. I don't know how active it is, but when I was there, yeah, it would kind of be the kid on the weekends, basically, like coming in and just servicing the regs. And, you might get one odd one here and there. So I could definitely see that because I don't think that I've met a lot of people that are full-time doing service in the industry. Just a random question. What are the typical problems that you see when servicing a reg? Like, do you see a common problem, or are they all just completely different?
So it's going to be based on whatever kind of reg you're talking about, or whether it's a flow through piston, flow by piston, diaphragm, etc. And the second stages, and it's going to be area to area, which is something I've been finding the last couple of years too. So where I dive, it's a volcanic island. Everything at one point was lava rock, that is land. That breaks down into lava rock sand. Lava rock sand is harder than brass. So one interesting problem I find is people love, just to name two of them, people love, all atomic first stages are going to be a flow through piston, and the MK25. There's almost exactly the same reg, right? There's a few small differences. They have an ambient chamber where the spring sits. I'm gonna, if I lose you with jargon, stop me and be like, hey, can you explain that better?
Oh, no, it's all recorded, so I'll just replay it and get to know it better. So keep going,
so,
man.
In the ambient chamber where the spring is that sits on the piston, if it's not a sealed version, which the only one of those two that is sealed is going to be the atomic, they make a sealed version. If it's not sealed, then you get water, and whatever's floating around in the water floats inside of that ambient chamber. So when it gets in there, I have seen regs, and I have pictures. It's part of what I do is I give everybody a full service notes and photos of everything I found. If that black lava rock, little tiny bit of sand, gets on the piston head and sits on the O-ring, it will move up and down with the piston. And I have pictures of just gashes of like lava rock sand that have been moved up and down. And then what happens is now the piston O-ring won't seal against the body. And so you get a leak out of your ambient chamber, which is not the end of the world, but your intermediate pressure now is not going to hold stable. And so it kind of throws the whole thing off. So that's one problem I see. Another problem I see that pretty much is going to apply to every reg is people who don't dive their stuff often. Yeah, it's like a car. You got to drive them. So the second stages, with the exception of the Scuba Pro has this thing where you can like set the orifice away, and Atomic has what's called a seat saving washer, sets the orifice away from the seat. But basically, if you don't dive in very often, the second stage has the orifice in the seat, hard metal part or plastic that sits against a soft silicone seat, and they sit there and they make a nice groove together because they're in a closed state. And then what happens if you don't dive it for 6 months to a year, first time you separate them, they made a nice, real strong groove, and you separate them, and they don't quite seal right again. So you either need an adjustment, or then you don't dive it for 2 years, and the manufacturer says at that point you have to get it serviced to be within their specifications for safety, right?
Yeah. So that is actually one. Well, I know from just working in the dive shop in Texas. I mean, people are amazing sometimes in the things that they do. Like we would have people. It gets hot in Texas. I mean, we're known for how hot it gets in Texas, right? And you'd have some guy be like, "Oh yeah, I have these regs. They've been sitting in my garage for 4 years in Texas
with no
heat.
AC."
No AC.
Yeah, I know exactly where that's going.
Why doesn't this work? And I can still use this, right? And I'm like, and it's funny. In when we were exchanging emails, it's like, this is life support equipment, right? Like this literally is keeping you alive under the water. You just want to pull it out of your garage and like, and I literally, it's like they got back from the trip, wherever the destination that they went to, some saltwater destination, just threw it in the garage. It's been sitting there for 4 years. And it's like, why doesn't this work? Can we get this serviced? It's not even working well. And it's like, dude, this is, you got to go about this a little bit different. And, I was a horrible salesperson, but like other people like, oh, this is, you want to buy a new rag. This is an old rag. And I'd be like, I don't know if you can fix this. Maybe we can try, but I'm always trying to save somebody a buck, but like, yeah, dude, it's amazing some of the stuff that you'll see people. And that was actually one of the things that I heard, I think early on, is like the problem isn't if you're using it all the time. It's more if you stop using it and then things dry in there and then it becomes brittle and things start to break apart. And I'm very, very incompetent when it comes to like, I know the basics, right? Like I've taken the service class, whatever, maintenance your gear type stuff. But as far as like getting into it, but it's something that I'm hoping to get into this next year, as far as like taking courses, because I know that they'll offer some like online courses, or I've heard various things from different courses that you could take to repair regs, right? Like you could go take a Scuba Pro course that might be offered in 8 hours, where another one's offered like over the course of a weekend, like 2 to 8, 8-hour days. Tell me about like, if you want to start repairing your own stuff, what's the correct way to go?
So you've hit a real passion topic for me. Basically, I think one of the big issues is that, so for a manufacturer to sell equipment, they need to make sure that they can service that equipment, right? It's a problem with rebreathers. Is like you said, if you want to get your rebreather serviced by somebody that's not you, you're sending it to Florida or Mexico. Yep. And that's really hard. It means it's gone from you forever. So manufacturers make it available to their shops to provide courses. There is one manufacturer that provides a course to the general public, which is Hog. They've paired up with TDI and they offer a course. You can take those courses. Specifically, any normal consumer can go take the Hog course. For the major brands, the only way you're going to take a course is if you either work at a shop that sells the stuff, or if you are friends with somebody that owns a shop or has an in at the shop and wants to help you get into one of those courses. So you get into one of those courses. Like you said, some of them are, I'm not going to use names on all of them, but some of them are online where you buy the course per the regulator, right? So you buy the first stage, second stage course, and it is literally a PowerPoint presentation with, 10 questions at the end of the section, and it's a pass, which by that I mean you try it, you don't get enough right, it tells you what you got wrong, take the test again, rinse and repeat. Yeah. That's the lower side. The upper side is there is a manufacturer still to this day that it requires that you do an in-person course on the first time you get certified with their stuff. And after that, it's just an easy online renewal, which that I really appreciate. And I can get into more about it after. But, you have this huge gambit of what now people require, or the manufacturers require. And the problem is that even the best one, which they require you to be there in person for 2 days, 8 hours a day, it's only 16 hours. And in 16 hours, you're only going to learn so much. And then they give you a presentation, a PowerPoint, or a manual to fix the stuff. And the manual is only going to have so many answers. The manual is not going to know that you're in Hawaii and there's black lava rock sand, and that black lava rock sand is tearing a hole into your brass. They can't think of everything that could ever happen. So if you're out there in the field, wherever you are in the world, and you have this one really weird problem, they might not have the answer for it in that manual. So now if you've gotten certified in 3 brands and you only work on whatever once a year, and you see a weird problem and you can't figure it out in the manual, well, your next option is to maybe call your instructor who taught you the class, or if you don't have one of those because it was online only, now you call the manufacturer, and you might get somebody who worked on regs a little bit. And a lot of times it leaves people in this situation of, I don't know what to do. So that's I think education is a big problem in getting people to repair regs on a level where you're actually problem solving and not just reading a presentation. But the hard part is I don't have an answer of what's better, because like I said at the beginning of this, was for manufacturers to sell stuff, you need to be able to have somebody in the field to repair it. So the more technicians you have, the more support you have, the more stores you have, the more you can sell. So it's a weird balance of, I have to, as a manufacturer, I have to have technicians out there. So I can't hold this level of, hey, you need to come to my 1-month course that is only here in, wherever, New Jersey, and you have to be there for a month, because no one's going to do that. Long story short, if you're the normal consumer and you want to learn about repairing regulators, what I would recommend somebody does is, if you have a good attention for reading and learning on your own, there's an awesome book. It's called Regulator Savvy. I believe the author is Pete Wolf, and I might be butchering this history. So if I do, I'm sorry. I believe he was one of the engineers at Scuba Pro. So he wrote a book on scuba repair, and it's 2 sections. The first section is everything you never wanted to know about how a regulator works. I mean, dude, there's a whole section on O-rings. And I that was when I like started reading through it and I was like, it's interesting, and my eyes are like nodding off. But he covers the how like the math works into how large the surface is that you're trying to seal, and working pressures, and when you pressurize something, what's getting pushed on, and how that how a balance regulator works. Super interesting if you're into it. And then the second half is actually about, once you've repaired the regulator, tuning it, and
Okay.
what the different adjustments are, and what you're actually doing, and how that affects it during the dive. And it breaks it down even to the level of position of your head compared to the first stage, compared to where you are in the water, and how that affects your breathing. It's a pretty interesting read if you're looking for good information on this. So
Yeah.
I would start there. And then a second piece of advice, I've never taken it, but I'm a fan of scuba board. Do you ever go on there?
Yeah. Oh, all the time. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hit and miss. Sometimes you can get trolls. Sometimes you can get some great info.
Yeah.
There's a guy on there. His username's R Singler, and I've never taken his course, but it's a 3-day Zoom course, and he's booked out like, I don't know, 6 months in advance, as far as I know.
Is he out of Florida? The name sounds super. I mean, I'm almost positive I know the
I
name.
think he's out of California. I honestly
Oh,
don't
okay.
know.
Okay.
But like whenever I read through the scuba board on the regulator section, and I see a post by him, I'm like, I sit down and I read the whole thing. Man, this guy's a nerd. I love it. But so he
Yeah.
teaches a course, and it's open to the public. He does ask that you already have some experience working on regs.
Yeah, scuba board. The funniest thing I ever heard about scuba board is, the great thing about scuba board is it's a great place for information. But the problem with scuba board is you have to go on there to get that information.
it's
It's a double-edged sword for sure. So I knew about the Hog Technician. There's another company out there. They're based out of Florida. I actually have a set of their regs, Deep Six. I don't know if you've
Deep
heard
Six.
or are
Mm-hmm.
familiar. So I know one of their, I don't want to say big selling points, but what impressed a lot of people is they'll actually sell, when you buy their regs, they come with a service kit, which is, pretty nice, because then you don't have to buy a kit. And then from what I was told, and tell me if this is true, if you could service a Hog reg, you can service a Deep Six. If you could service a Scuba Pro, you could service a Deep Six. So I don't know how true that is. I guess the question that I wanted to ask you, and I don't know if, I'm sure you've heard this, is it's like, you could take 4 different manufacturers, and you put those first stages all right next to each other, and it's like, dude, these are exactly the same. The Deep Six, the what is it, the MK25, even the Atomic, like, they're super similar. There's a company out here called Akuana, and I swear, like, you put them next to each other, and it's like, does this all come from the same place? Can you dispel any myths on that, or tell me any bit of information on that, or is that just industry secrets?
No, it's not industry secrets at all. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm about to like get a call from a manufacturer. Like, I'll tell you this. I have heard some rumblings that like there's a couple companies that literally like same manufacturer, like they get their parts casted at the same manufacturer somewhere overseas, and they rebrand them with theirs. I do know fairly certainly that, like, especially with pressure gauges, there's like a company in Italy that makes pressure gauges, and they just rebrand them for everybody. That's why they all look the same. But
Yeah.
there's like, at the end of the day, there's only so many ways to make the wheel, right? And what we have is an amazing piece of equipment that it runs purely based on air pressure and springs. It can deliver you downstepped air to your ambient pressure without any sort of power source, which is amazing. But there's really only a couple ways to do that. So yes, a lot of them, when you learn how, there's a couple brands that if they have a couple different models, and if you learned how to service those models from that brand, you wouldn't open up another brand's one that was a similar looking one and go, wow, what's going on here? What it really comes down to, the differences are going to be a couple features. How they change their, like, speaking for first stages, how they modify their IPs. Some people have figured out some really cool ways to do that from, outside the first stage, so you don't have to open the whole thing up. Some of the things that are going to be different are how they are taken apart. But at the end of the day, when you break it down to nuts and bolts, they're all basically the same kind of feature. Like any flow through piston, it's going to be the same principles. Any diaphragm, it's going to be the same principles. So, when you see those Deep Six now that came out, and you see the Hog that looks just like an Apex, I'm not going to say you could do it, but I'm fairly certain you could probably take one service kit from one and use it in the other one, and they probably all fit.
Yeah, because I've actually only heard that there's a few brands that are proprietary to where it's like you need to get the kit from like one thing I've heard about and this is all secondhand knowledge. I don't know. One of the things that people always talk about Apex, they're like, dude, Apex they're beasts. They're workhorses. And if need be, you could go to Home Depot and get the parts you need to rebuild it. I'm not saying that you should do that, but like, they're basically saying like the parts are easily and readily available, as opposed to say like a Scuba Pro, you need a proprietary wrench just to take the thing apart, right? Like, which is kind of a pain in the ass because I have a Scuba Pro and I'm just like, dude, I can't mess around with it. Not that I'm breaking into it. I don't do that sort of stuff, but I'm just like, it's just kind of an irritating thing sometimes, I guess. But Scuba Pro, I still love you, so.
I will say this. Speaking of, like, in case Scuba Pro is listening, you love them. I will say this to CYA. Every manufacturer says you need to have our parts to service this regulator. And it comes down to, outside the U.S., I think, we're a very liability-heavy country. So, like, here, it's, if you don't use these parts, we cannot guarantee it's going to work the way you want it to. And some of it is factual. Warranty.
Yeah.
Right. And some of it is factual. And this is like one of those really nerdy things that you learn when you've been doing this a little too long, is like there's this tiny little O-ring that goes on the end of a poppet inside of a balanced second stage. If you look hard enough, you can find the exact measurements that somebody out there was like, I want to know what size O-ring this is. So they took a digital caliper and they measured this tiny little O-ring that is smaller than, like, it's about the size, maybe a little smaller than the large side of a pinhead. If you don't have the right thickness of that O-ring size, and if it doesn't fit on the end of that poppet right, what happens is it actually has too much friction for the balance chamber in the second stage, and it's actually going to affect the performance of the regulator. So when they say you need to buy our parts, they mean it because of the fact that if you want it to work perfectly and have the right amount of friction and have the right amount of resistance on all of the parts, you need to have theirs because they were designed to work with their parts. So yes, at the end of the day, you should go, but you need to buy all the parts to make sure everything works perfectly. That's as much as I can say about that. But the tools you can find, you should break into your reg if you're comfortable doing it, if you've taken the courses, But yeah, be careful.
So, because that's something that I always kind of like wonder. Like especially with the regs, and we won't go more into this, but I'm like, okay, it's a proprietary O-ring. I'm like, did the regulator company, do they own the O-ring factory that makes the O-rings? Because usually O-rings are like readily available. You just got to know where to find it, right? Like they buy it from a company that makes O-rings. They're not going to be like, we need this exact spec. So you need to remachine everything so we can have this different size O-ring than everybody else in the industry. So. But hey, shit, maybe that's why some regs are like fucking $3,000.
Yeah. And you know what? So another part of it is not so much for the O-rings, but you mentioned that you said Apex are workhorses. And one thing I have noticed between different manufacturers is I think a lot of it comes down to the quality of metal that you're getting when they make the regulator. So I'm a huge fanboy. It was the first reg I started working on, and they're the ones that I own for like my recreational diving is Atomic. One thing I love about them is that they're manufactured in the U.S. using metals that you can call, like, if you're really determined, you can get a hold of somebody and say, hey, tell me what comprises this metal, because they have a CNC factory in, I think it's Santa Monica. When they take their reg pieces, they have a chunk of, their three different kinds are, they call it zirconium, which is a mixture of nickel, copper, and a couple other things, brass, and stainless steel, and titanium. So they take whatever kind of metal it is and they CNC it out at their factory and they make it right there. So you're getting high quality metal. Whereas I can't speak to anybody else, but if they're sourcing their parts from overseas and they're at a factory that's not, doesn't really care, they're just like, oh, we want brass, but maybe it's dirty brass, and maybe it doesn't hold up as well as marine grade brass. So that's a big piece of it, is what the metal is from the manufacturer and if they're getting a quality source of it. I will say, so I own Dive Right regs. I dive Right regs. I service them. I'm a certified technician. I serviced my reg to spec the way they want you to do it. I went to go use it one day, and I own a number of these regs. They're the XT1, and this is the only time I've ever seen this. I found the body, actually went to go use it, and the body had like cracked down the center of it, of the first stage. Yeah.
No
and like
shit.
the diaphragm crack, it's like cap came off because the body's cracked, the threads couldn't hold it on anymore. And I took a picture and I was like, hey guys, just so you know, this happened. Here's the serial number. Here's the photo. Like, I've never seen it again. I've serviced a bunch of them. I dive them every day. I service them still. Like, no hard feelings for them.
Yeah, bad batch of metal or something.
Who knows? Yeah, like, and
Yeah.
that a lot of it comes down to metal,
Yeah,
like
no,
what you're getting.
and so in I don't want to say my former life. I mean, pretty much up until earlier this year, I was a welder. So I've worked in the semiconductor industry, welding mostly stainless steel, occasionally aluminum, and there's 100% different grades of stainless. You have your nice 316 or 304, and you can tell when it's not. I don't want to say it's a bad batch, but when you're welding it, and then the properties are different, you're like, dude, this is welding funky, or this is just some shit metal. Like, what's going on? So no, I completely agree with that. So I guess another question I wanted to ask. Well, have you ever messed around with one reg that I've heard time and time again? People are like, oh, they're great regs, but they're a pain in the ass to work on. Have you ever worked on Poseidon regs?
I knew that name was coming. I haven't. I'm not certified in them, and so as a general rule of liability, I won't work on anything I don't have a certification in. I can't get parts for. That being said, I just actually, when I was at DEMA, I went over to their booth and I was like, hey, I service all these different kinds of regs. I work in an industry where we have thousands of tours come through, and I see everything you could ever see for regs. So if I can get your certification, I would love to. Whatever we need to do. And he sat there with me and he went through the whole schematics, and they are a different beast. They do everything differently. I can't give you an honest opinion on them because I haven't opened one up and worked on them. I have two qualifications for having an honest opinion: is one, getting my hands on them and using them; two, opening them up, seeing the inside, seeing what it looks like; and three, doing that, but at least a dozen times and seeing what happens over lots of dives. If I see it one time and I go, yeah, it was great, but that person used it for 6 months and dove it like 10 times in 6 months, and I look at it, I'm like, yeah, it looks great. But if I don't see it after a year, 2 years, 3 years, and 300 dives, I don't know how it actually ages. I'll say this: it's a pretty cool concept. I really like their first stage. It seems like it would take a lot of one problem you get on first stages, which is the really critical part, is the whatever the knife edge is in the different models. Their knife edge is basically this. They call it a ruby ball. That's the seal, and then the knife edge is a cone. And it seems like the way they described it, that it would hold up really well to damage, and that you're not worried about things flowing through the first stage that would otherwise give it wear and tear that I see in some other regs. Their second stage, it's a pneumatic servo controlled second stage, and they are finicky. And like we talked about earlier, one of the big problems with any manufacturer is you need to have people in the field to service them, because that's the only way people are going to buy them. And so I think technicians who don't have the time to put in to learn these things, they're kind of off put by them because they are finicky. I worked on a couple of them that are Hollis's version. Hollis has the 500 SE, which is kind of the same idea. And in that manual, when you read through it, every other page is a giant exclamation point and a big yellow box, and it says, "Do not do this. You'll break it." Yeah. And the first one I worked on, I like broke half of it. So yeah, they're cool. They breathe real well from what I hear. I think they just need more support in the field, more education.
I hear about things, I forget about things, and I know. So I like, if I put my brain to it, I'd probably be able to remember it. And I feel kind of stupid even having to ask this, but I want to say that one thing that I heard, because I actually have a Poseidon, it's the Extreme Deep reg. It's sitting in a storage unit in Texas, because I was like, the thing is super heavy and I need to bring it out here at some point in time, but I need to get it serviced because it's literally just, it's an AC storage unit though. So that's a little bit more of a benefit. But one thing I heard that people didn't like about the regs is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it's an upstream as opposed to a downstream. So can you tell me a little bit of the differences of both and why you would want one over the other?
So it's a bit of a myth. Basically, yes, Poseidon's second stage is an upstream, which means if that second stage, I don't know exactly which parts of that fail, but I know parts of the second stage fail, it will fail closed. However,
meaning you cannot access gas from
there's no
the
gas.
reg. Yeah.
Correct. I have not done enough research to know which parts of it would cause that to fail closed. However, so on the contrary, other second stages, right? So any other unbalanced or balanced second stage, if the major components were to fail, what's going to happen is it's going to fail open. So if your spring inside that controls your demand valve, if that were to crack and break, it's going to just shoot the poppet open, the seat open, and it's just going to flood you with air. That's why you practice that, free flow.
Yeah.
Breathing off free flow. However, a lot of first stage designs that people love are a downstream design, in that there are certain parts of the first stage that if they were to fail, you're going to fail closed. And you can test this yourself if you have access to a diaphragm first stage regulator. You can assemble half the high pressure half, so the balance chamber side and the yoke, and just not put the diaphragm on it. And you can put that on a tank and you can pressurize it and nothing will come out. In fact, they teach you in classes to do that and then to put a little bit of water right where the seat, the hole for the seat comes through. And they say if you see any bubbles from water, you know you have a leak in your seat because it shouldn't be coming through. So there's a spring and there's a pin in there. And if you let that pin, and I have pictures of pins that are, springs that are cracked. And if that spring cracks and were to fail, like say you didn't service your reg after diving in the salt water and you just dove and dove and dove, never rinsed it, let the spring rust, and it gets a crack and that crack breaks, that reg would fail closed. You would not get any more air from your first stage. Same with the pin. If that pin was to be bent or cracked and fail, it's closed.
Well, I was gonna say, how would it bend? Like, what are some things that would cause it? Like, obviously, if you're smashing it on the ground is one thing, but like, how? Like, what? I guess, do you see a common cause for first stages breaking down, and what are those causes? Like, it's just rough usage.
The springs I see if you get a lot of rust. So if you're diving, so most parts of a first stage are going to be made of brass for most companies. There are certain things that aren't made of brass because it's a softer metal. So springs, not going to be made of brass. If those get rust on them, and heavy rust, and you never clean them, as that rust, they'll weaken that spring. That spring's got a lot of tension on it, and eventually those weakened areas from the rust can crack. If they crack and they break, now you got a problem. The pin bending, that's going to be more of like somebody's going in there and they're messing with the pin and doing things to it they shouldn't be. But that is something they tell you to check for, because if that pin's bent, it can affect the performance of the regulator itself. You know, the best thing you can do with your equipment, if you want to make sure you're not worried about these catastrophic failures, is one, if you're diving in salt water, rinse it. It doesn't take long. Just give it a thorough rinse. Know how to take care of your gear. Some manufacturers have certain things you're supposed to do and not supposed to do. On top of that, get it serviced when they say to get it serviced, or even just buy a little cheap intermediate pressure gauge. And every once in a while, hook your first stage up to your intermediate pressure gauge and see if your intermediate pressure is holding steady. And there's a couple other tests you could do, but that's a big one. And, you know, get it serviced every 2 years, 100 dives. That's basically what the general recommendation is.
Yeah, and you can find what the intermediate pressure should be just off of like the manual, correct? Like you don't need to go do some heavy searching to find that.
I don't know if they put it out in the user manual, but if anyone's listening to this, I can tell you most modern day regulators are going to be between 125 PSI and 145 PSI. In bar, I think it's like 8 to 10 bar or something like that. And then there's a couple, like the new Legend's lower. It's like it might be as low as like 115, 110.
So another question that I wanted to ask, because this is kind of a not a myth or whatever, but I'll hear from time to time some people feel this way about regulators. They're like, oh, these things are workhorses. They're absolutely amazing. Go as long as you can without servicing it, because as soon as you service it, it'll fuck up. So in your opinion, is that just a bad technician?
Until I see somebody do something, I can't say they're bad. I hear the same sentiment as you, where people say, hey, known parts that are working now are better than somebody taking it apart, messing with it, and putting in unknown parts. And it is true that some of the most common times for failure are immediately after a service. What I would say is, if that's your fear, you need to find someone to do servicing for you that is going to show you every step of the process. I think it's an unfounded fear. And if somebody is doing the due diligence of not only giving you all of your used parts back, but going to take photos of you for you of any damage they find inside, and the before and after, and all of the, all the tests they do after, including the cracking effort of your second stage, the intermediate pressure, putting it in a bucket of water and letting it sit there for 2 minutes and filming it and showing you, hey, look, here's 2 minutes, pressurized, I'm going to purge the second stages, nothing's leaking. I said this to you in the email. You shouldn't be trusting anybody with your life support equipment in a way that you expect more than your car, right? So if I go to my mechanic, I have an awesome mechanic. He takes photos of everything in my car that's broken, and he takes photos of it after, and he tells me what he did. It's life support equipment. Anyone who brings me their stuff, I'm taking photos of it before, I'm taking photos of it after I clean it, and I'm taking photos of everything after I test it to show you, hey, here's everything I did. Here's all the parts. You don't need to trust me anymore. You can see what I did. So in my opinion, yes, problems can arise from changing out old parts to new parts. And if you know it's working, it's working. But things only work until they don't work, right? And you don't want things to not work when you just spent $4,000 to get to Indonesia and you're 3 days into your liveaboard and now you're breathing off their rental reg, which is not your flow through piston MK25 or atomic. Now you're breathing off their MK2, which is a flow by piston. And when your tank starts to get half empty, you're like, man, it's real hard to breathe off this thing at 80 feet. So yeah, things only work till they don't.
So as far as like myths or things that you hear, do you hear common thing? Like what are some of the common things that you run into that people will say to you, or just kind of things that you'll hear a lot in your line of work?
My favorite one is somebody will bring me a second stage, and occasionally they'll bring me only the second stage. And they'll say, hey, this is leaking. And I go, awesome. Where's your first stage? And they're like, well, it's not the first stage, it's the second stage. And so the thing to realize is that any part of the breathing system is all connected, all the way from filling your tank. It passes down the stream. So if you want someone to fix your second stage that's leaking, you need to have your first stage because they work together. I tune your second stage to your first stage based on its intermediate pressure. You might give me your second stage that's leaking, and I might go hook it up to my first stage, and it's not leaking anymore. Because what's happening is your intermediate pressure on your first stage is going up to 180 psi. And part of the whole fail-safe system is that if your intermediate pressure goes above 100, whatever it's tuned to, or your second stage is tuned to, your second stage starts leaking because eventually that hose will blow if it doesn't. That's one of my favorite myths. Another one somebody told me recently, and I've heard it a couple times, is this guy came in and he just starts opening his tank up right next to me and he's bleeding it out. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I got to get the bad air out.
Sorry,
I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, it's been sitting there for like 3 months. Unless you have a steel tank that has 100% O2 in it and you're afraid of rust, as long as you trust the person that fills your tank to change their filters regularly and have very dry air, man, I wouldn't worry about air for years and years and years. Yeah, that's another good one. Stainless steel tanks, there's a difference, but yeah, it's minute.
That's funny, man. Like I said, I always like to end on a piece of advice question. Before I go there, is there people that have their own equipment that want it for longevity, because I have some other advice questions that I'd like to throw out there, but is there anything that you want to say as far as like, hey, if you own equipment, don't do this, do this? And I know you've already said it kind of like, hey, just service it, but any other type thing that you might want to mention before I throw my last question out?
Like I said, rinse it with fresh water. Know the environment that you're diving in, specifically for like what you want to buy. But like I mentioned, the one example I keep going back to is the black lava rock sand. I would never tell anybody here to get a unsealed flow through piston, because if you get that black lava rock sand in there, I've replaced more bodies from that than you'd believe. And they're expensive. They're $80, $90 for that body on top of your service charge. So know where you're diving and what kind of equipment you should have for it and what's the best way to prevent damage from happening, whether it be a sealed first stage or unsealed. Rinse it, keep it in, if you're in a hot, dry area, keep it in AC, right? Plastic cracks, it doesn't last forever. And then, here's a big one. I could send you pictures that would give you nightmares, but people will see this. You open up a lot of second stages and you see this really gross, yellow, mucousy stuff. Lungs are dirty. Breathe into a balloon or get a rebreather and look at your counter lungs after 50 hours and you'll be like, wow, that's gross. I tell people, and my buddy, he's always, I won't name him, he's always the worst. Whenever he has me service his reg, I open it up and it's just like gross inside. But I told him to start doing this, and it did make a difference. Was at the end of his dive or when you're washing your gear, take your second stage and make sure you vigorously pass water through it. Shake it back and forth in the water column, or even just purge the second stage a few times. Because if you have your mouth open on a regulator and you're in a downward facing position for an hour, you're going to drool, and drool's viscous. I know, man. It's like, it seems real, like funny and gross, but like drool's viscous, and just dunking it in water gently isn't going to get that drool off the inside of your second stage. And that's when you start getting those fun, funky colors that sit around and grow. So yeah, those are the things. Wash them, keep them in, good conditions, AC, and give that second stage a nice vigorous back and forth swish at the end of your dive on your safety stop.
All right.
It'll keep
all
it
right.
cleaner.
My last question for you before I let you go, and this has been super interesting, man. I'll definitely have to have you back on. So somebody that is an aspiring technician, somebody that wants to get into the side of the industry that you're in, you know, you've obviously been doing this for a while. You've had accomplishment. You've made mistakes. What is the best piece of advice that you could give to that person who wants to start getting into this side, start building rebuilding regs, working on equipment, not just for themselves, but kind of for, you know, in higher numbers, essentially? Maybe they want to approach the shop and start working on regs for the shop. What's the best piece of advice that you could give to that person?
Well, the first one, you said it yourself. Find the person at your shop that is in charge of deciding who's going to do that and be like, hey, I'm interested. I want to learn. And get them to certify you in the course. Second is get that book I mentioned, Regulator Savvy. You can buy it on a site called scubatools.com. Super interesting. It's a dry read, but if you want to know about it, that's the spot to go. The third one is get reps. And if you're at that dive shop and you ask to be interested in it, that means you're going to be doing those rental regs and get really good at them. You know, open them up, rebuild them whenever you can, and keep doing that over and over. If you can do it with the same model, you will learn it so well, and then you'll start noticing little differences of, hey, this one is wearing weird this way, and I'm seeing this one problem over and over. I wonder what's causing it. Try to understand it, which is where that book comes in really handy. Try to understand the path of air and understand what's happening in the whole system well enough that you can start to say, I'm seeing that one problem. This is how the air flows. I wonder what's either coming from the tank or is coming from the outside or what's happening on the inside that is causing that wear. And when you can start asking those questions and start looking at the path of air and how everything works together, you're like gonna suddenly have an aha moment of, oh man, I get it. I get what's going on. And that, like you said, there's not really a huge difference between brands. When you get one, you're going to get the next one, and you're going to get the next one. And then it's just like a waterfall.
Awesome, man. Well, Sam, I absolutely appreciate you coming on to the podcast, dude. This has been absolutely wonderful. It's so random that we're both from New Hampshire.
I know. That's unreal. Yeah, no. Small world, man.
Live free or die, right? Live free or die.
Hey, no seatbelt, baby. No seatbelts.
I know, right? They used to not require car insurance too. I think they still have no sales tax, but yeah, either way. But
yeah,
no,
no
man,
sales tax.
This has been awesome, dude. I absolutely appreciate you coming on to the podcast today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a blast. You're a ton of fun.
Off Gassing, a scuba podcast.